It's not a surprise that we would be that high in terms of the rank. Second in the nation when it comes to total ag sales.
All told, China's holdings are now 4% of GDP, of our GDP. If the Federal Reserve just did nothing, then it would have a short-term impact.
The trade disputes have caused a huge amount of economic pain, and farmers are finding every way they can to tighten their belts just to make ends meet.
China has responded in Donald Trump's trade war, halting orders of Boeing aircrafts. Let's go live to 9 US correspondent Jonathan Kersley in LA. Jono, good morning to you. Has the president responded again?
The red counties that once roared with cheers for Donald Trump have gone quiet. In the same towns where gymnasiums and barnyards overflowed with farmers waving flags and pledging loyalty at Trump rallies, the fields now lie still. Tractors are idle, silos are full, markets are empty. And across the Midwest, the very farmers who helped deliver him the presidency are now grappling with something they never expected: betrayal. Trump's tariffs, sold as a bold move against China, have inflicted their deepest wounds not in Beijing, but in the heart of America. Places like Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Indiana. Small farms, family farms, the backbone of the US food system. These farms are being hollowed out from within. What was pitched as protectionism has led to consolidation. What was promised as strength has exposed a dangerous fragility. And for the first time, the heartland is asking, how did we let this happen? It all began in 2018 when Trump initiated his first trade war. Soybeans were the opening shot. China, once the top buyer of American soy, retaliated with crushing tariffs. Demand collapsed, prices fell. Farmers, many of whom had already bought seeds, fertilizer, and equipment on credit, suddenly found themselves with millions of unsold bushels and no one to sell to. By 2020, the damage was staggering. Farm bankruptcies rose 24%. Export losses topped $27 billion. Still, Trump's base remained loyal. Many believed the pain was only temporary, that a better deal was just around the corner, that China would eventually fold. But it didn't. Instead, China pivoted to Brazil. By 2024, Brazil had taken over more than 70% of China's soybean imports. Once a dominant force, the US had become an afterthought. And yet, in 2024, many of the hardest-hit farming counties voted for Trump again. Of the country's 444 farming-dependent counties, he won all but 11. Now, in 2025, he's repaid their loyalty with a second wave of tariffs, this time even broader, even deeper, and even more damaging to the very people who stood by him. China retaliated again. So did Canada. And Mexico. But this time, there's no $28 billion bailout. No big promises of a new deal. And now, the smallest farms are taking the biggest hits. During the last trade war, more than 90% of bailout funds went to the largest 10% of farms. Some received over $1 million. Meanwhile, the bottom 80% of farmers got less than $5,000. Minority-owned farms received even less. Between 2017 and 2022, the number of farms under 10 acres dropped by 14%. In contrast, the number of large operations, those making over $2 million a year, more than doubled. The policy was clear: protect the biggest, let the smallest disappear quietly. Now history is repeating itself. But this time, the markets aren't just closing, they're vanishing. In April, China canceled a 12,000 metric ton order of US pork, the largest cancellation since the pandemic. Farmers in Ohio and Iowa were left with perishable goods and nowhere to sell. Soybean and corn growers were also forced to halt planned planting expansions. Input costs have soared. Tariffs on imported fertilizer and machinery have pushed operational costs up by as much as 40%. And the buyers aren't coming back. Even the recently announced 90-day tariff truce has offered little hope. Chinese tariffs on American soy may temporarily fall from 125% to 10%, but Brazil, tariff-free and flush with record harvests, has already secured the contracts. American soy is now a backup plan, not a first choice. Corn farmers are seeing the same trend. China and Mexico have shifted their purchases to Argentina. Futures markets are already pricing in the change. Export-reliant farms are bracing for another fall season with too much supply and too few buyers. In Minnesota, some corn growers are planting early wheat or cutting acreage. In Kansas, wheat farmers are clearing out storage and dumping grain into ethanol production for pennies on the dollar. In Arkansas, rice shipments are delayed by customs backlogs in Southeast Asia, where U.S. rice is being undercut by Thai exporters with no tariffs. Livestock producers face a similar crisis. The U.S. pork industry has lost billions in export value over the last 5 years. China, once the biggest buyer of American offal and variety meats, now turns to Europe. Even with trade talks resuming, confidence hasn't returned. In April, yet another round of pork orders was canceled. Beef exporters are next. Canada and Mexico, both top 5 markets, have signaled retaliatory tariffs in response to Trump's renewed levies. Any disruption could wipe out profits for cattle ranchers already on the edge. The dairy sector may be suffering the most. In 2024, U.S. dairy exports topped $8 billion, but nearly 20% of that went to just 3 countries: China, Canada, and Mexico. All 3 have either enacted or are threatening new tariffs. China's dairy tariff now stands at 84%. The result? A flood of oversupply, collapsing prices, and an accelerating wave of dairy farm closures. What sets this crisis apart isn't just its scale, it's the silence. Unlike in 2018, there's no safety net, no promise of help. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins has said publicly that while a bailout isn't planned, it's being considered. The message is clear: wait, watch, and if you can, survive. But survival is no longer guaranteed. An internal USDA forecast now warns that farm income could drop by more than $40 billion in 2025. If that happens, it would mark one of the steepest annual declines in modern history. Banks are already pulling back, tightening credit lines. Equipment dealers are reporting canceled orders. Farming co-ops are seeing fertilizer sales fall. The signs are all there. The farm economy is flashing red, with warning signals not seen since the days of the Dust Bowl. Despite this, the political response has ranged from confusion to outright disregard. Some lawmakers are trying to curb the president's tariff powers, while others are doubling down on economic nationalism, urging farmers to stay strong and insisting that China will come back. But China has already moved on. So has the European Union. So has Mexico. And so has the rest of the world. The United States is no longer seen as a stable supplier of agricultural goods. Instead, it's viewed as unpredictable, politicized, and unreliable. Countries aren't just hedging against future risk. They're actively replacing the U.S. in their supply chains. And the communities suffering the most are the same rural counties that built America's agricultural legacy. In Iowa, farmers have begun liquidating their livestock. In Kentucky, soybean fields are being converted to wheat or left fallow entirely. In Texas, irrigation has been scaled back to the bare minimum to cut costs. And in California, dairy co-ops are warning that another collapse in exports could trigger massive consolidation. Even the largest operations aren't immune. But it's the small farms that will go under first. Many already have. Between 2018 and 2024, the number of black-owned farms declined by more than 8%. Indigenous farming operations fell by nearly 10%. Farms led by women saw their share of total revenue cut in half. And with every new round of tariffs, the pace of collapse speeds up. Trump has publicly said that farmers should have fun selling to American buyers instead. But the math doesn't work. U.S. consumers can't absorb the massive surplus left behind by lost exports. Domestic demand covers only about 60% of soy production, just half of dairy, and less than 40% for certain pork cuts. Without exports, the system breaks down, and the president knows it. So do the national farm groups, many of which have begun to speak out. The American Farm Bureau now warns that $1 in $5 of farm income depends on exports. The National Farmers Union has called the tariff strategy reckless. Even the American Soybean Association, which once supported Trump's trade stance, has changed its tone, issuing a blunt statement. Even short-term tariffs can cause permanent market losses. And once those trade relationships disappear, they're gone for good. Meanwhile, across the South and Midwest, farmers are no longer waiting. They're hosting town halls, pressuring their state lawmakers, and organizing trips to Washington. Their message is simple: we are dying out here. But so far, that message hasn't broken through. In today's hyper-partisan media landscape, the struggles of rural communities rarely go viral. There are no trending hashtags for empty grain silos, no breaking news alerts for spoiled milk or unpaid feed bills. Just the steady hum of the grain dryer, the growing stack of overdue invoices, the foreclosure notice quietly slipped into a mailbox, and the question being whispered in red counties across the country: is this what winning looks like?